Let's get it. This is Life's Essential Ingredients with Jeff and a Mike, where we hope to inform, inspire, and transform lives, one essential ingredient at a time. Welcome to the show. Here we go again. And listeners, I'm a little bit more. I get so excited for every episode, but my Pasho's been gone. He's been vacationing, been traveling, been working everywhere but on the show. And so if you just listen, you can't see how pretty he is, but hopefully you listened in and know that we're best friends, college roommates since we were 18 playing basketball at the University of San Francisco. So Pasho, I missed you, man.
It seems like it's been forever. I've missed you too, man. Missed your pretty face. Beard looking good as always. Happy to be here.
Oh, yeah. A little bit more gray, but that's the way it goes. And Pasho and I have our birthdays coming up. It's funny. I'm July 2nd and he's July 5th, and he gives me the business every single year about how I'm older than he is. And I do probably look like I'm maybe 10 or 15 years older than he is. But I'm only 3 days older, and my Pasho is the wiser. So we're going to get into this. But if you are brand new to the show, Life's Essential Ingredients is part of a nonprofit. The nonprofit is called C4 Leaders. Mike and I run that, and we're the only nonprofit to utilize the pizza making process to create space for our companions to be seen, heard, and loved. We write children's books. Obviously host this podcast and use the most amazing handmade, hand-tossed sourdough. That's right, sourdough pizza to bring out the best in each other. So check out pizzadays.org to support our important work. Let's get into this episode because it's going to be fun. We are season 3, episode 21. I can't believe that, Pasho. We have Jeremy Doran coming from Rhode Island. First time we got a guest coming from Rhode Island. And listeners, again, we thank you. We're in 41 countries now, Pasho, 602 cities, which I can't believe. And so we're ready to go. First of all, where you can find our guest, Jeremy, is a couple different sites, thelittlekids.us, and JeremyDoranspeaks.com, JeremyDoran speaks.com. So about our guest, with degrees in both mechanical engineering and psychology, Jeremy brings a unique perspective to leadership for people in technical fields. Having overcome the same communication challenges that many engineers face, Jeremy is able to engage, enlighten, and entertain his audience. Jeremy delivers strategies for communicating with different audiences in different ways. His work experience includes process reengineering at Pratt Whitney, global strategy for APC, which is now Schneider Electric, and owning a franchise business and coaching hundreds of engineers on their journey to becoming great leaders. Jeremy, thanks for sharing your gifts with the world and for helping people be better communicators. Life's Essential Ingredients welcomes you to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. And listeners, you know how we do it. We always start with a thought of the day. And before I get into that thought of the day, I do got to give a quick shout out to my brother P. If you're listening, which I know you are, I love you. Appreciate you tuning in. And that's for you, man. We're stopping the show, sending you some love. Brother P, right at you, baby. So thought of the day. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. And that's Peter Drucker. Why would I pick that one for you?
That's a great one. So as you talked about, help people communicate with people who are not like them. So when I was growing up, people really never made sense to me. And it seemed like they were saying one thing and it was code for something else. Everybody seemed to know the code except me. And so what I learned was that when someone says something, I don't make assumptions that I understand what it actually means most of the time. I will just stop and ask. And then sometimes if I say something and I can see that they're not receiving it the way I intended it, I'll again stop and I'll just say, I don't think we're communicating right here. Can you tell me what you just heard me say so that we can get on the same page? So very often people talk in to me what seems like code. And if you don't know the code, it's best to stop and ask.
I love that. And I love how you say stop and ask, because I do think, and you're the expert on communication, but I do think so many times we just don't want to ask for help. We don't want to say that we don't know. We don't want to say, hey, can you help me understand in a different way, or in a better way, or in a more precise way what you are trying to communicate. And so much gets lost then in translation. And Jeremy, my profession was 29 years as a registered nurse, and so many challenges in every profession, but definitely in the medical profession as well, of trying to get on the same page to make sure that we are providing the best care to our patients through communication. So it's going to be a great episode, and I think you're going to be able to help a lot of people. We always start, though, the show, and this is just a broad question, and you can take it any which way you want, but what was life like growing up?
People ask that all the time, but I was the youngest, so I never knew any different. But we basically had our own village. A lot of people are influenced by their friends and by other people. There are so many of us that the village was within the house. And there were a lot of times when you had to scrap and fight in order to survive. And then there were times when we all got along great. Now that we're adults, it's so interesting when we have family reunions, because it's getting back together with people who all understand basically everything about you. And it's just so fun and easy to do once you're around them again. So reunions are fantastic. Growing up sometimes was fantastic, sometimes was a struggle.
And I know we're going to get into your book, but so you were the youngest of 10, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how many boys and how many girls?
5 boys, 5 girls.
Wow.
And interestingly, when we started having kids, it got down to 9 boy and 9 girl on the next level. Then I had a girl, and everyone stopped and looked at me and said, well, you have to have a boy now so that we can get things back in balance. We're out of balance. I'm like, oh, I'm done. I've had one. I'm good. You guys have a boy. And they say, we're not having a boy. So I forced us to be out of balance, and they're still mad at me for it.
Oh, man. So you won't know this, but I grew up with 7 siblings. So I'm one of 8, and I'm the youngest boy, and we have 5 boys and 3 girls. And you can't tell, but both Mike and I, not that we're brothers, even though everybody thinks that we are, we're pretty tall. And so my brothers, it was kind of funny. The oldest one 6'2", next one 6'3", next one 6'4", next one 6'5", and then I'm 6'8".
Wow.
And I'm pretty thin. They were all big guys, and but so fun growing up. And yeah, it was an interesting way to go through life. And my mom and dad had us all within a little bit under 11 years.
Yeah, we were within 16.
Yeah. So it just makes it to where everybody is so close, and there was one point growing up where all 5 boys shared one room, and it was so much fun. And just a mattress on the floor, there was no beds, just a mattress down on the ground, and a blanket maybe. And you're sharing, everybody's socks and underwear. I don't think I ever had socks that matched till probably I left the house, nor that had holes in them. So but that's your norm, and we grew up, we had all of our needs met, but we didn't know what real milk was till I was about 6 or 7 years old. We had the powdered milk where you just added water to it. But again, that was norm. And just like you said, I love how you started the show. You had your village. That was us. We grew up in a court, and that was it. How are you going to take 10 people, somewhere? And so we kind of ran that court, and just had so much fun just getting outdoors and playing and enjoying each other's company.
Nice. So, that all sounds pretty familiar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear what you're saying about scrapping. I'm sorry, you're just taking me back to remember a few things, but if you were not going to be getting after it at the dinner table, there wasn't going to be a whole bunch left. I mean, you had to get in there and mix it up and make sure that you got yours, because it was going to be gone. And so, yeah, so fun.
So we always had enough to eat, but not always necessarily as much as we wanted of the things that we liked. So everybody had their strategy. My oldest, one of my brothers would always sit on my dad's left because dad got the food first and then it went around the table. So his strategy was to get to the table early. So he was always second and he would get a good thing. I was too little to like reach as far as the other people could. I couldn't eat as fast as they could. So my strategy, mom would always make a meat, basically a starch, and two vegetables. One vegetable was always corn because everybody ate corn. And then the second one was up for debate. I would always request lima beans because I really like lima beans. No one else likes lima beans. So guess how much lima beans I got? As much as I wanted. That was my strategy.
I love it. I love it. And obviously you were in good with mom.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Last thing I'll share, just because we have so much in common, and I don't know how my mom did it. My dad was a great provider and a good man, but he was an alcoholic. And I think he let a lot of that guide a big part of his life. And so my mom, I raised us, and her nickname was The Rock. And when she just died in 2019, and I had the good fortune of doing her eulogy, and we were in the church, and I would Mike and I played basketball. I think I told you, and so our family was huge into sports, and so when I was introducing all my brothers and sisters, I would say mom's favorite, number one, and then I'd go down the list, and so everybody was mom's favorite.
Nice.
And I don't know how she did that, but I'm not kidding. Every last kid felt like, oh man, I'm mom's favorite,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. It's just the magic that moms have, of how they can do that. So any moms that are listening, we love you and appreciate all that you do to care for your family and to be the glue that keeps everybody together. But that's enough, unless you got anything else to say about it, Jeremy.
No, we're not as tall as your family was, but I'm 6'2", 6'3". My oldest brother's 6'4". And I was just telling someone yesterday, growing up, there was a footprint on the ceiling in the living room because he was doing handstands barefoot and he just pressed his foot up against there. And no one ever saw fit to clean that up or paint over it. And it would make people laugh when they'd walk in the living room and see a footprint on the ceiling. They didn't know what happened.
I love it.
Yeah, I only have one brother, so I got to say, I think I would have been terrified living next door to either one of your two families. Way too many of you.
What's funny is even with all of us, there were normally other kids from the neighborhood who would come over to our house for dinner. So there's normally like 12 kids for dinner instead of just 10.
Yeah, no, ours was the same way. I think people just felt, hey, what's the difference? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more. It really doesn't matter after a certain point. And yeah, for somehow, people get kicked out of their house, they would stay at our house because you just throw a blanket on the ground and a pillow and they're good to go.
Yeah, so, as long as you're not fussy.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, so let's get in to the show is called Life's Essential Ingredients. And I want to narrow what I'm going to ask you about your communication expertise. Normally we'll ask the guest, hey, what are your essential ingredients of your life? But I want you to take a deep dive into what are your personal essential ingredients for being a great communicator just on the daily. I mean, are there things that, and I know at this point in your life, it's probably like a habit and you just are so good at it, but are there things that you're mindful of each and every day as far as your communication practices go?
Well, first, I want to let you know, I don't consider myself a communication expert. I just am really happy about the fact that I overcame so many struggles and I've gotten to be pretty good at it. And what I really want to do is speed that up for other people. So very often I'm dealing with engineers who got promoted into management because they're great engineers. No one taught them how to be managers and they don't communicate the way a lot of other people do. So they really struggle with that. And eventually they will learn it or they will go back to just being engineers. But I like to speed that process up. So I don't know if you could call me an expert, but I've overcome hurdles and I want to help other people get over them faster than I did.
So what are some of those hurdles that you've overcome?
Well, there's a number of different things. As I said, people don't always make sense to me. It feels like they all have an unspoken rules of their communication, and it just doesn't click for me. So I stop and ask often, and I pay very close attention. That's what I learned being the youngest of 10 kids, is I would really watch what everyone was doing at all times, because you never knew when there was going to be a pig pile or something else that you'd be at the bottom of if you weren't paying attention. And then I also would pay attention to when they said one thing, what it really meant, and when they said something else or somebody else said it, what it meant for them. So paying close attention, asking questions really, really went a long way for me.
I love it. So that quote then is really hitting home. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said and just having the awareness to kind of know what's going on. And I want to get into, you've talked about it a couple of times, overcame some struggles. I'm generalizing here, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but talking about how perhaps engineers maybe communicate, we'll just say maybe communicate differently. Why is that? And what is the difference, to explain to the listeners who maybe aren't engineers and have been struggling with someone that communicates differently, and helping them make sense of that and perhaps grow that way?
Well, one of the dimensions I talk about a lot is how you speak with logic or emotion. And if one person is talking with logic and the other person is talking with emotion, the communication just doesn't really work. At one of our family reunions recently, one of my sisters was talking to two of my nieces, and they were talking about a book, and I could see how they were not understanding each other. One thought they were talking about the literature of the book, and the other one thought that they were talking about the racism within the book itself. And they were getting more and more emotional, the people who thought it was about racism, and the other people were just talking about the logic of how it was written. And that conversation just went nowhere. So very often when things start getting heated, you need to really take a step back and understand where the other person's coming from. Your logic is never going to be heard until you address the emotion of the other person. And very often engineers and myself really are logic first and then consider the emotion later. If the other person's talking with emotion, that doesn't work, and we have to recognize that.
I'm sure you're familiar with different personality types, as far as, and there's so much different space in which people talk about this, but, four of them that I'm pretty familiar with would be someone who's knowledge-based, which it sounds like that would be somewhat of the engineering people that you're working with, structure-based, again, which could be, some of the engineering, and then energy-based versus compassion-based. And so when you're training the people that you're working with, how do you break it down based upon, and I use those four examples, and I know you're talking, about logic versus emotion, but is there other kind of categories of how people communicate that the listener can take and say, oh, that person falls into that category, and this is the strategy that I need to use for them, so we can speak the same language and get things done?
Yeah, another one is if you think in big picture or details. A lot of engineers tend to think in details. And the struggle that the managers have is the managers just want to know what the engineer needs from them. The engineer feels the need to explain all of the details going into it. So I will tell every engineer, if you need something from your manager, tell them what you need, and then let them ask you questions if they have them. If they don't ask, you don't have to give them all the details. They probably don't want it.
Yeah, and that's a great just piece of advice, because less is more for sure. And I think in communicating, learn how to be articulate with what is it that you need, using less words is definitely, and I'm a bad example of that. I get so many so much feedback from my family on this show. Like, man, you're talking way too much. Say that in fewer words. And I'm working on it. And that's why I'm excited for this episode. But yeah, really good tips. And I know you help people, develop their leadership and management. And I guess that would be my next question. What is the difference between leadership and management, especially from your perspective of, within the engineering field, or just, broad?
Yeah, broadly, I think that management is getting people to do things. Leadership is getting people to want to do things. So when you're a good leader, people want to follow you. And if you have an idea that really strikes a chord with them, they're going to choose to go there, and you don't need to push them. Sometimes in management, you need to push people. Leadership is really pulling people along with you. And
I know, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I know you try and help people focus on playing to their strengths. Mm-hmm. Which is going to allow them to be better leaders and better managers. How do you do that? And do you focus on the weaknesses and overcoming those, or do you kind of put most of your energy on helping them develop their strengths?
I personally think that you should focus on your strengths, develop them, and then interesting thing about weaknesses is sometimes you can delegate them out to someone else if there's a thing that you're not great at. You can automate it. And, there's so much technology. If you're not great at a thing, sometimes you can just automate it. But sometimes what seems like a weakness is really a strength. It's pretty surprising how often that happens. I, for one, am very introverted, but I'm a really good networker, and no one would expect it, because I go into networking and I've got a goal. I want to get 6 business cards. And once I do that, then I'll allow myself to go. So I go in, I have good, deeper conversations than most extroverts have, and I get my job done, and then I go home. Extroverts, a lot of times at networking, will go and they will chit chat with everybody. They don't get into much detail. They don't have any goals to accomplish. They're just having fun. So it's great for them. They're having fun. They're making connections, but they don't necessarily get as much out of it. And you would think an extrovert would be much better at networking. It's not always the case.
Yeah. No, I like it. And I know you work with teams, and trying to help team dynamics and improving them, and hopefully making, the business more efficient. Walk us through maybe a team that you work with, or just in generalizing, what are team dynamics, and how can the listener kind of take some knowledge from you in that space?
One thing that comes up over and over again is the influential person on the team who is not the manager. So they don't officially have any sort of power, but as the manager, if that influential person on the team is working against you, you're never going to get anything done. So sometimes if you're going into a meeting and there's one person who can be difficult, or just people will follow, sometimes you kind of want to talk to them ahead of time and get them working on the same page with you so that you can all accomplish the goal that works for everybody.
And that's huge. And does that do you do any culture work when you're working with your teams at all, on just trying to build up the culture to focus on being good communicators? Or
tell me more about what you mean by a culture.
Just of how teams, businesses, families, how the work gets done, and there's usually a culture that's created that could be the written rules, or could be kind of unwritten. Hey, this is just, how our team operates. Do you do any work in trying to help people and the clients that you serve, in that space?
Not directly, but I try to get everyone on the same page in terms of what the goal is. And then a really important thing, if however many people there are on the team, I will have them figure out what the most important activity each person on the team can be doing. And if everybody on the team does that and then presents to their manager what they think the 5 most important things they should be spending their time on, and then have a one-to-one conversation with the manager about that, very often they'll find out that there's a misunderstanding about what their role on the team really is. And that conversation goes such a long way to getting them on the same page. And the other interesting thing that happens, if they come to an agreement of the 5 most important things this one person can do, and then the manager says, hey, I want you to do this other thing, the person can say, which of these 5 things is less important than that now? And so it gets them on the same page, and it helps communication later on when things shift.
I love that. I love that. And that kind of leads to, and you spoke to it a little bit, but, the root causes of miscommunication. What would you kind of list as the top, root causes?
I think the top one is making bad assumptions about what the other person means. And going back to the logic and the emotion, people who think logically and talk logically just tend to be blunter and get right to the point, whereas people who are emotional tend to couch things a lot more. So when they couch it and they try to soften their message, the logical person may not always pick up on what they truly mean. And when the logical person doesn't couch it, it sounds a lot harsher to that person, and they think that it's much more aggressive than it was intended. So again, stopping and asking a question and seeing if your assumptions are correct, I find crucial.
Jeremy, I have a question. And where I work, I'm a real estate appraiser. I work for the county here in Los Angeles. And a lot of times we have people that get promoted to a supervising position from being an appraiser. And a lot of times they'll either be supervising people they already know or thrown in an department where they don't know anyone. And I've seen a lot of different styles how people approach that situation. I don't know if any of them are great, but it depends on the person, obviously. Is there one, if there's one piece of advice you can give that person going into that role, whether they know someone that they're going to be supervising or not, or managing, what is that one piece of advice you think would help them out the most?
I think a crucial thing in leadership is being confident enough to ask questions at all times. So you, Jeff, talked about asking questions and people not wanting to ask questions. And it's interesting how the more willing you are to ask questions, the more confident you come across, and the more people are willing to trust and believe in you. So for me, when there's a new manager, if you are trying to pretend that you know everything, you're going to have a hard time getting the respect of the people on your team. If you're confident enough to surround yourself with people who know more on different topics than you do, you'll go much further.
Yeah, I love that statement. And both Mike and I were high school basketball coaches. And one of my favorite players when I was coaching at Vacaville High School asked, I don't know how many questions each practice. And to be honest, at the start of it, I was like, man, are you kidding? We got to go. I want to get going into the drills and stuff. But then I quickly realized that everybody has the same question. And I probably wasn't being clear with the instructions that I was trying to give the players for that particular drill. And she wanted clarification. Maybe she took one of your classes. And it made the season so enjoyable, because you got to teach more. It led me to create this process that I called a teach back, which was, all right, I'm going to give the instructions, and then I want you to immediately teach that to one of your teammates about what we're going to do in this drill. And it just became a game changer from that one player bringing my awareness up that I could do a better job in communicating. And so, I love it. Let's get into something that's not.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah,
that's brilliant. So 2 things that I would like to say is when I was first starting out in the technology industry, vendors would come in and talk to us. And there were other people in the room who had been in this industry for 20 years. I was brand new, and they were talking about things I didn't understand at all, but I didn't want to ask the question to look like an idiot. Until a couple of weeks in, I asked the guy next to me, I said, hey, what does he mean by that? I said, I don't really know. So I started asking questions, and everyone in the room would thank me for asking those questions. These people had been doing it for 20 years and they didn't know, but no one was willing to ask the question. So always ask the question. My saying is that I'd rather ask the question and look dumb than not ask it and remain so.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And you just get buy-in, and you were talking about roles, and I kind of got goosebumps when you were talking about that, because I think there is so much confusion, especially when you're working with teams on, hey, what is my role? Where do I fit in? And just the example you shared, the example, when I was coaching of my player that just did a great job in role modeling that. But when you can do that, you quickly identify your role and how you bring value to your team or your industry or your family. And without that, you just end up being like some of the people that you mentioned, doing a job for 20 years. And you got to believe that that person doesn't enter that space each and every day with the same fire and passion as the person who is seeking knowledge and is open to learning and growing, which leads me to the next question I have for you is feedback. How do you help your leaders, your managers give and receive feedback? Are there any tips for that?
Yeah, depending on what type of feedback it is, compliments are something that most people could do better. A couple of different ways. When you're giving a compliment, always give compliments in public, but you don't need to make them too detailed in public. There's some people who will love it, and there's some people who it just makes them uncomfortable. But at least let them know in public so that everyone else can know. And if you can include your boss, if it's an email congratulating someone, include your boss. And then it just looks that much more important. But specifically when you're giving a face-to-face compliment, be very specific. If you just say, hey, that was a great job, and that's it, it doesn't mean anything. But if you say, hey, you did a great job because of this one particular thing that you did, and I know X, Y, and Z were real obstacles, and the way you got around them was great. That goes so much further. It helps them know what was good, and it just comes off as so much more sincere.
I like that. I like that. What about when you have to give some news that's not so good and someone's not performing to the best of their ability in their role for the team and the team suffering? What tips do you give to that manager?
For that manager, I say be very specific on the detail of what's not going well, rather than just saying you stink at whatever it is. Say, hey, this past month you were 10% behind, or whatever the statistic is. Give them the exact information that is correct without any interpretation, and then ask them to tell you about it. Say, hey, you were 10% low on sales last month. Tell me about that. And then just be quiet and wait. And sometimes they will not have any good reason. Sometimes they do have a good reason. But if you let them talk without badgering them, you're going to get a lot of information about what's going on. And then together you can usually come to a solution as a team so that you both want to do this thing rather than just pushing a solution on them.
I love it. I love it. I love how you said, be quiet and wait. And I would call that just let it marinate.
It's hard to do.
Yeah. Just sit there though. And, my last job, I was working as a nursing professor, and I'd ask, especially in the clinical setting, ask my students, some questions and just sit there and just let it marinate. And most of the time people will come up, with what they need to come up with to make sense of things and solve problems. And so, yeah, I love that tip. But let's get in you. Go ahead.
Just one more tip on that. It's very hard for people to sit in silence. So very often someone will ask the question and then not give it enough time. So I always recommend having a bottle of water and then ask the question. And if you're uncomfortable with the silence, open the cap, have a sip of water, put it back down, and let that give you a reason for why you're waiting so long. If you ever look at public speakers, very often they'll drink water, or comedians. They're not drinking the water because they're thirsty. They're drinking the water because they want to make a pause and let their thoughts sink in without it seeming awkward. So bring water with you. It helps.
Good tip. Good tip. And let's get into your book here real quick. First of all, just congrats on becoming an author. I think
Thank
there's
you.
a lot of people that want to do that for one reason or another just don't make the time for it. So that's great. And the title of it is The Little Kids, correct? And tell the listener about your book and why you wrote it.
A lot of it is because I would tell stories about my family and people would be telling me, you should write a book about that. For years and years, they told me that. And as I was coaching people, I would use examples of, different ways that people communicate or different leadership styles. And I found that the stories I was telling were about my family more often than they were about actual work situations. And it occurred to me, the lessons that I learned from growing up as one of 10 kids were so valuable that I should actually sit down and write a book. So it went through starts and stops, but we got it done and very happy about it.
Awesome. What'd your family say about it?
Well, it's interesting. We did not tell them about it until we were just about ready to publish it. And they were all taken aback, wondering what kind of stories we were going to tell about them and if we're going to throw anybody under the bus. But we were pretty careful to not do that in our book. And they've all read it and they all really, really liked it. And then it was a great conversation of ways to go back and find out, I remembered these things this way. My oldest brother remembered them a totally different way. So it started some really good conversations.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get into that because we'll be talking for too long. And I feel like we're in such a good space. Again, we're season 3, episode 21 with Jeremy Doran, coming from Rhode Island. The best place to find him, 2 sites, thelittlekids.us, which is what he's talking about right now. So grab his book. Sounds like an incredible story. And then jeremydoranspeaks.com. So we always end the show with a quote from John Alston. The only thing you take with you when you're gone is what you leave behind. And, let's fast forward 50 years for you and you're on your deathbed. You're ready to take your last breath. What is it do you want to leave behind?
I often ask people that question when I try to get them to make their personal mission statement. So I'll just cut to my mission statement, which is have fun, be the best I can be, and make the world a better place. That's what I want people to say that I accomplished.
I love it. I love it. Pashito, get us out of here.
Jeremy, that was awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show and enlightening us with your knowledge, and just keep doing great things. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Any closing comments you want to share? You think we hit everything that you wanted to share with the listeners?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I think that was great. If they have questions, they should reach out and we'll talk more.
All right. Well, thanks. Good. Thanks for everything, for being our guest. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. Pashito, you know how we do it. Boom, baby. That just happened. We out.